It's me, Erica. So today we're going to be finding like denominators. Now, I know that sounds really scary. It kind of sounds new for some of you, and some of you might have done this already before and are looking for how to do it. So if you remember from my other video, we did finding least common multiple. So what we're going to do now is we are going to find the least common, these words are familiar, right? But now we're doing least common denominator. Now, if you don't know what a denominator is, the denominator is the bottom part of the fraction. Think about this. Denominator starts with D, just like down. So that's the denominator. And the top, we're not working with that right now, but just so you know, it's called the numerator. So again, the down, or the bottom, is called the denominator, and the top is called the numerator. So today we're going to find the least common denominator between two numbers. And that's the same thing that we were doing with least common multiple. So let's start with two numbers that are easy to do. So everybody take out your worksheet, and we're going to do problem number 1 together. So problem 1 gives us two sets of fractions. One set of fractions, I apologize. 3/4 and 1/2. And it's asking you to find the least common denominator. So to find the least common denominator, I'm going to use the same method I used for least common multiple, but I just need to know what I'm looking at. And again, what's the denominator? It's the bottom. So between 2 and 4, what would be my least common multiple? Well, remember we start at 4. 4 times 1 is 4. Does 2 go into 4 evenly? Yeah. Remember, because 2 times 1 is 2, and 2 times 2 is 4. So my least common denominator here is 4. So my least common denominator is 4. And that's what we're doing today. So we're going to go through our whole worksheet to identify what our least common denominator is. So let's go now to the second problem. The second problem gives us two numbers, 2/5 and 1/15. So, just like before, are we going to compare the tops or are we going to compare the bottoms? Remember, it's the numerators or the denominators. Well, just like the instructions, we're looking at the denominators, the downside. So let's write down our numbers, 15 and 5. And remember, I like to start with the bigger number just because if the smaller one goes into that evenly, I'm done already. So 15 times 1 is 15. And does 5 go into 15 evenly? Yeah, it does. So let's do 5 times 1 is 5. 5 times 2 is 10. And 5 times 3 is 15. So my least common denominator is 15. That's it. That's all we're doing today, okay? So we're going to go through the rest of our worksheet now. I want you to start it on your own. Let's have you guys each do problem number 3 while I'm erasing the board. So I'm hoping that you guys had started already. Now, if I'm looking at 8 and 6 and I'm trying to find the least common denominator, if you notice on the last two problems, the smaller number evenly went into the bigger number. But that's not the case here. It doesn't do that. 6 does not go into 8 evenly. It would have a remainder of 2. So we have to figure out a number that 6 does go in evenly to, and 8. So what is 8 times 1? 8. But we know that doesn't work. 8 times 2 is 16. Does 6 go go into 16 evenly? No. We would have that 6 times 2 is 12 with a remainder of 4. So let's try adding another 8. That's 24. Does 6 go into 24 evenly? For those of you that said yes, you're right, because 6 times 4 is 24. So let's do 6 times 1 is 6, 6 times 2 is 12, 6 times 3 is 18, and 6 times 4 is 24. Take a look, we got the same number here. So my least common denominator is 24. Now, I'm going to challenge you. I didn't give it in the directions, but I'm going to give you a big challenge. I want you guys to find the equivalent fraction that has the least common denominator of 24. So I want you to think about this. Use those thinking caps of yours. How can we turn 8 into 24? 8 times what would give me 24? That's right, 8 times 3. So let's multiply by 3. But remember, when I do equivalent fractions, whatever I do to the bottom, I need to do to the top. So I'm going to multiply by 3 here. So that fraction is now 21 over 24. Okay? How about this one? That's my equivalent fraction, and if you want to double check, you can, because if I divide by 3 and divide by 3 and reduce that fraction, I have 7/8. Now let's take a look at this 5/6. How can I turn 6 to have a denominator, a denominator of 24? Well, we said that it's multiplying by 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're going to multiply by 4 times 4. But again, whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So times 4. So the other fraction will end up being 5 times 4 is 20, and 6 times 4 is 24. So if you notice now, I have a least common denominator. My denominators are both 24. That means it's the smallest number that both multiply to become. And the tops now are different. So when I reduce these, I'd have the same numbers, but now they have the same denominators. We're going to use that more tomorrow. So I'm going to erase, if I can find the eraser. I'm going to erase, and let's keep going with problem number 4. We'll do equivalent fractions one more time for this entire worksheet, and then if you want to challenge yourself and do it on your own, that's wonderful. I'd be super impressed. But if you choose not to, you don't have to until tomorrow. So, problem number 4. It tells me 1/5 or 1/2, and 1/2, I apologize. So 1/5 and 1/2. So, how do we find our least common denominator? Let's write our numbers down. 5 times 1 is 5. 5. But does 2 go into 5 evenly, perfectly, without any remainders? No. How about, what's 5 times 2? 10. Does 2 go into 10 evenly with no remainders? Yes, it does, because 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 2 times 3 is 6, 2 times 4 is 8, and 2 times 5 is 10. So that was the smallest one, and nothing else matched in between. So my least common denominator is 10. Now, if I want to write my equivalent fraction, I need to know what I need to multiply by. So 5 times what gives me 10? 5 times 2. And whatever I do to the bottom, I've got to do to the top. So 1 times 2. And let's look at this one. Let's do it at the same time. Crazy. So 2 times what would give me 10? 2 times 5. That's right. In fact, I ended up using my numbers back and forth. So 2 times 5, and whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. Remember, because we want to keep them to be equivalent fractions. So let's rewrite them now. 1 times 2 is 2. 5 times 2 is 10. And the other one, 1 times 5 is 5. And 2 times 10 is 10. And now I have a least common denominator of 10 with 2 equivalent fractions. Okay. Last 2 problems. Number 5, 3/10 and 7/15. I think this one's a hard one. So, let's start. We're going to write our 2 numbers, 10 and 15. And we're going to start with the multiples of the bigger one. Because does 10 go evenly into 15? No. So what's 15 times 1? 15. Well, we just said 10 doesn't go into 15. So let's go to the next number. 15 times 2. That's 30. Does 10 go into 30 evenly? Yes, 10 times 3 is 30. 10 times 1 is 10, 10 times 2 is 20, and 10 times 3 is 30. So, my least common denominator is 30. Now, let's do the last problem. Oh, you know what? I'm going to give you a little answer. If you want to know what these would be, with your least common denominator, we're going to multiply by 3, multiply by 3, multiply by 2, multiply by 2, and that is 6 over 30, and the other one is 14 over 30. How many of you got that? How many of you didn't even try? I want you to keep trying though. I know you can do it. So let's do the last problem, problem number 6, and that is 5/6 and 1/2. So let's write down our numbers, 6 and 2. 6 times 1 is 6, and does 2 go into 6? You better believe it, because 2 times 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, and 2 times 3 is 6. Well, that made that nice and easy. So my least common denominator is 6. So this already has a denominator of 6. So I'm just going to copy it right over. But to make 2 become 6, I multiply by 3, I multiply by 3, and I get 3/6. That's it. That's your lesson for today. Don't forget to do your practice problems on your independent work, and I look forward to seeing you next time.